Hi, my name is Anne Ratchat, and I am the owner and producer of Magistry Studios, and today I thought we'd talk about networking because it's a thing that I have found a lot of people really struggle in gaming, and also professionally because people aren't given good skill sets in order to succeed, to get to know people better. And there's a couple pretty easy tricks that make you go a lot farther in it. So let's start off by diving into what is networking and why do we care about it. So starting off, networking, the definition we're using is meeting people with the intention of learning and utilizing their skill sets. A lot of people think about it professionally. For example, I want to get a job, so I'll connect to a person with this skill set. Or this person is really useful and has this skill set, so let's get them this job elsewhere. But it also has a lot of other greater social applications beyond just the professional lifestyle. For example, it can be used pretty extensively in community planning. I've been using networking to set up a network of urban farming networks in Los Angeles. You can also use it to set up barter systems where you do skill for skill trades. It's also really useful in times of crisis, both personal and larger scale, where you can set up emergency community systems. For example, there's pretty common stories in the trans community of people being kicked out. You can use your networks in order to find that person a place to land safely. For other reasons, you can deal with severe illness. Let's say someone's been hospitalized. And so everybody can connect in order to support that person who's been hospitalized and also their family outside of that who are also dealing with quite a lot of stuff. It's really useful in a lot of ways for wherever support is needed. So I think that it should be a skill that people are constantly developing because you never know who you're going to need in your network. Okay, now we've established why we care about networking, let's talk about how to network. And it is both incredibly simplistic and very challenging at the same time because the best way to network is to make friends. Yeah, it sounds really like school-based recommendation where it's like, yeah, in elementary school, I knew what people were up to because I was friends with them, but turns out adults don't act that much differently either. So the first thing to really remember is we are all very socially awkward and weird people. Anyone who says they are not is just like not being honest with themselves because being social and being confident in social places takes a lot of energy and a lot of practice. The people you think that are most confident and most secure about themselves have a lot of internal insecurities that they're not showing. So just start there. People are weird, awkward, social beings. From there, utilizing friends in order to create a network is really important because friends remember what friends do. If you think of a random person who you've interacted with like twice in your life, you're probably not going to know what they do. You're not going to know their interests, not their skill sets, their hobbies. They're just a random person kind of vaguely related to this part of your life, maybe, if they ever come up. And so as a result, when you make friends, you have a better understanding of what they do because you've taken that time to develop that relationship and see the complexities of who they are. And also it makes it easy on the other person to then recommend you for various positions or things that they think might be interesting to you because they also know what you're into. It's also, as we mentioned, networking is not just one and done. You have to consider the entire community organization. So as your friends start introducing you to new friends, they'll be like, yeah, you two should talk about blank topic and start connecting your network in larger ways. So by making friends, your friends end up doing the networking for you, and it's really quite neat. From here, it's really important to talk about how you do not need to put on any persona in order to start making these friendships because as much as you don't like everyone, not everyone is going to like you, and that is totally fine. What you're going to be focusing on is who are the people who are inherently interested in the things that you are interested in. And so one of the online Tumblr recommendations that has gone across our board multiple times is this idea of discussion menus, where it started off as a little campy autistic party trick where you would have a laminated menu of 5 things you are interested and capable of talking about at any time. And in order to start making friends, you would just go around and say, here are the things I want to talk about tonight. Do you want to talk about any of these? And it simplified the social interaction very quickly because people could see what you were interested in and then opt in or opt out of the conversation very quickly. So nobody was wasting time trying to him and haw over small talk, which really doesn't make anybody feel particularly validated most of the time. So let's get into some of the advanced ways of making friends, and these are for people who are more socially attuned. This is hard. I'm just going to say that from the get-go. This is hard, but this is stuff to keep in mind when you're out there trying to make friends because it makes making friends way easier. Using these skill sets is one of the reasons why I've been able to seem like I belong in a lot of places when I'm there for the first time, interacting with everyone for the first time. And people assume that I'm friends with everyone at the table, and that's because I have a couple of tricks that I've picked up in order to make myself seem approachable and generally comfortable in my situation so that my fear doesn't push other people away. So the first one is body language. One of the things you might see right now is I'm sitting with my shoulders back, and the intention of that is in order to present a more welcoming environment. If I sit with my shoulders hunched, it seems like I'm awkward, it seems like I'm uncomfortable, and my discomfort in my own body presents in my voice. If you didn't hear, it starts to come a little bit more stagnated. A lot of the treble tones get a little bit more cut off. I become a lot more monotone, and it in a lot of ways makes the autism present a lot more publicly than I would like in a day-to-day fashion. You have to come off as confident, and it's one of those you fake it till you make it type things, because in reality you're never going to be confident enough. It's just a case of confident enough to pass as a person who knows what's going on. So it's really important to be conscious of how much space you're taking up. If you're afraid to take up space, other people will also be afraid to take up space. If you take up too much space, then other people will shirk away because they don't feel like they have a place to belong. But if you find that balancing act of being sure of where you're standing in relationship to how everybody else is standing, it becomes an invitation to come in, which also piggies us back onto how to be welcoming. One of the easiest ways to create a welcoming environment is to use active listening and active listening questions. It's really cool to use questions to prove that, one, you are listening to the situation, but also further the person in a way of saying you are interested in what they have to say on the topic. It's instead of turning statements as your answer going to questions, you end up having a lot more continuing of the conversation, a lot more direction. You can still lead the conversation. Leading questions are acceptable, but it doesn't change the fact that you are giving the platform to somebody else, and that becomes a really powerful tool. And the last thing to mention is when dealing with social situations, perception really does matter. I've had a couple people be very upset with me when I say gender expectations, but I happen to have experience in politics where how I act in relation to how people expect me to act changes my efficacy in the environment. So it's important to think about what is the presented gender, what is the general size of a person. A 6 foot tall person is going to come into an environment a little bit different than me as 5'2". And so as a result, one of the things I have to do as a smaller person is to present myself as bigger than I actually am in order to not just melt away into the background. Then from there, you can play around with appearances. Fashion is really, really important, especially coming from a person who lives in Los Angeles. Fashion is one of our daily ways of signaling if we prepared for the day, if we are capable and if we are a good fit for the job. So like how I dress in general tends to be a little bit more quirky, and some people call it like Dommy Mommy type stuff, goth Dommy Mommy. It is just the style that I've come into as a creative, as trying to express myself through fashion. I also wear fantasy dresses, but by elevating the fashion that I put forward, you end up inviting people to have comments on that fashion, to open up the door. It's amazing how anything that is a conversation starter, anything that is interesting, anything that is a little out of the norm while not challenging social norms too heavily, will present people an opportunity to break through and have conversations for the first time. And once you have that first conversation, that's the hardest part. You can start making friends. Okay, now we've gone through the hardest part of making friends, let's do a little bit of polishing of odds and ends tricks in order to make it that you can go even farther than just being another random person who has their friends and recommends their friends for everybody. So one of the big things with networking is to be yourself. It sounds very simplistic, very idealistic, but in reality, that is going to be one of your major selling points, is your sense of authenticity and how you relate to other people. So as we mentioned before, you don't like everyone, so not everyone likes you. There's also an extension of that. The reason why people like you is the same reason why people who dislike you are going to dislike you. So it simply is going to be impossible to please everyone. There's just going to be reason one or another that you find really big positives about yourself that inherently take other people in the wrong direction. And that's okay. If you are spending more time being authentic to yourself and finding out the tips and tricks that you find personally of making this go as far as possible, you're going to end up getting a lot more mileage out of those relationships than someone who is simply going for absolute numbers and not really investing in any one of them. Further, as we said, friends remember what friends do. We've established you're probably going to know what your friends do. So this is where you get the advantage and you figure out what everybody else does as well. It is totally fine to take notes, and it doesn't have to be perfect. But if you take the time to invest in other people other than just your friends, if you remember what other people do or try to keep other skills in general mind, you're going to end up finding the right person for the right place a lot faster because you just have a larger Rolodex of people to go through. It's really amazing how few people do this, and how, particular with me as an owner of a company, having the right person in the right place is really make or break in a lot of ways, and that would not have happened if I hadn't been going through and trying to find as many people with as many relevant skills as possible. Next, we're going to be talking about maintaining relationships and following up with people. As everyone is constantly developing and changing in daily life, from stressors and stuff like that, it's really easy to fall out of touch, and you don't know what a person has been up to recently. That is one of the major questions when you're doing any sort of medical training or interviewing or anything like that, is they'll ask you, what have you done recently? And so it's really important to remember what people have done recently. The best way to do this is to follow up and ask for actual time to have conversations with them. It can be digital through online happy hours or online coffee breaks, but actually meeting in person and having that coffee, having that dinner, just kicking back at the apartment and co-spacing or co-working gets you a lot of time to maintain a relationship. And as much as we talked about the complications of social media in the past, it's also really important to keep engaged in it, because that is one of your major connection networks in the current modern day. So engagement really, really matters. And when I say that, it's not just posting every day, but it's also interacting with other people's posts every single day. There is a little bit of a selfish element because the algorithms work even better in your favor when you are engaging with still similar like content. It tells the algorithm that people who like this branch of stuff might also like your content. So it can feel a little two-faced for people who don't understand how algorithms work and how that they're designed to react to how people are theoretically naturally supposed to interact with the algorithm, even if most of us don't interact with them in that way. But really, in the best way possible, it becomes a win-win situation, because by giving out into the community, you end up taking care of yourself as well, which is really one of the cornerstones of what we were talking about with the community building part of stuff, of like, I'm building out urban farm networks because I like fresh veggies. It doesn't have to be that complicated. And in the meantime, because I'm interested in a diversity of plants, it means I'm probably going to be growing too much for just myself, so that means other people also benefit from it. It honestly is okay to be selfish sometimes. It is okay to start off with your own wants and needs and try to figure out how to make everybody else win from that. So yeah, keep involved in social media, and keep connected with other people, because as much as we are saying this is about networking and knowing what people are doing, again, there's a reason why we say start with making friends, is because the best network is a community system. So get involved with that. Okay, so if you thought any of this other stuff we've been talking about is pretty cringy, of like make friends, make adult friendships, all of that type of stuff, we're going to be getting into the worst of it, because one of the other things that happens is people are very busy, and so their short-term memory is also limited, which means you're going to need to talk about your projects all of the time. You think you've mentioned it enough times, you're going to mention it again. It is one of the things I've talked to quite a few of my game designer friends who are pushing Kickstarters, and we all agree it absolutely sucks. You have to do it anyway. If you want to know what people are doing, the reality is there's so much feed and so much social media and so much news information coming in every single day, it can become quite a challenge to remember what is the cool project that you heard about 6 months ago that is live now. You may not have known that it has gone live. You may have forgotten about the project because it was announced the same week your kid was born, and so you were busy being a new parent. It helps to come in and remind people, hey, I'm working on this. Hey, what's your opinion on this? Hey, would you like to play test this game? Get people involved, get people invested, and find other ways of expanding. There's a reason why a lot of Kickstarters worked by having stretch goals of guest writers. And that is partially to get peer exposure, but also because that person's fan base might come in and be interested in expanding your work as well, because if your work is related to this person's work, then I'm probably interested in both. And you can just expand from there. So yeah, that is pretty much the 101 of how I network and how I've been able to get pretty far in networking in multiple industries. It really works well in gaming, where if people come in just professionally, a lot of people are going to have insecurity about that, be awkward about that, because they're here to have fun, and it's kind of awkward to talk money with most people when what you're saying is, I'm actually just interested in your project. So just say that. Start with friendship. Start with, I'm interested in your project. Can you tell me more? Ask questions. Anyway, if this video was helpful at all to you, give it a hype. And as always, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.